welcome everyone to our session, to our next session at this DELPHI Economic Forum. Before introducing our distinguished guests, I'd like to remark that this session is brought to you by the Democracy and Culture Foundation, which runs the Athens Democracy Forum in association with the New York Times. The mission of the forum is to help democracy evolve and empowering society through citizen engagement and better governance. And the organization has long been interested in testing different citizen-centered projects, including the building blocks of democracy. We have 2 reports, 2 policy recommendations about that. You will hear about them later. In 10 different countries, and their role in the Democratic Odyssey's core consortium, which Καλυψώ, one of our guests, will tell you more about shortly. At the same time, the journalistic approach of Athens Democracy Forum, supported by the New York Times, as I previously said, has sought to explore or interrogate the effectiveness of citizens' initiatives and whether they can truly lead to large-scale change. There were several panels and provocations at recent forums, Athens Democracy Forums sessions, some of them featuring our esteemed speakers here, and would like to continue that lively discussion here. So, the question today is, what is deliberative democracy? And according to Encyclopedia Britannica, it is a school of thought in political theory that claims that political decisions should be the product of fair and reasonable discussion and debate among citizens. So, to talk to this subject, we have here today George Pαπandrέου, former Prime Minister of Greece and Member of Parliament, and currently General Rapporteur on Democracy at the Council of Europe. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
We have Καλυψώ Νικολαϊδη, Chair of Global Affairs, Florence School of Transnational Governance, EUI in Italy. Welcome too. Nils Gilman, who is Executive Vice President and CEO. Mr. Gilman, welcome. Μαργαρίτη Σχοινά, former Vice President of the European Commission. Mr. Schina, welcome too. And last but not least, Fernanda Espinosa Garces. She used to be the President of the United Nations 73rd General Assembly, and now she is Board of Trustees member of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. Welcome. I would like to start with a question referring to all of our panelists. Some studies show that people are transformed by citizen engagement experience and can even significantly change their views as a result of them. But they are very expensive and limited in scope, and the question is it even possible to scale them up to make a meaningful difference to our democracies? Mr. Pαπandrέου?
Well, let me start just listening to the previous panel where we talked about European defense, and I think it has become a priority now and very important, and Greece has always been in favor of European defense. But what are we defending? Are we defending territory, or are we defending our way of life, our democracy? So this is where I would want to say that in our European defense, it must be democratic security. Now, what is democratic security? It means, Mr. Schinas know who worked on the culture of the European culture, it means the way of life, democracy, human rights. It means dignity, welfare, and peace, and cooperation. Greece has had that vision of European security, but if we think about democratic security, we also have to understand that democracy has been eroding in our world, in our countries. And I think we need to see why it's been eroding if we want to talk about democratic security and what we want to do. And I believe it has been eroding because we have been seeing the huge concentration of power, great inequality, the manipulation, the algorithmic manipulation of debate and discussion by the big platforms for profit seeking. And of course, there's a manipulation in the geopolitical sphere also through all kinds of disinformation and misinformation. So the idea of renewing democracy has to come back to a very basic idea of in people we trust. however, in people we trust is not simply just randomly let everybody have a voice, which we have on the internet supposedly, which can be noise, which can be bullying, which can be polarizing. We need to create a democratic ecosystem which actually uses the wisdom of the people, the collective wisdom we have, and that's the idea of deliberative and participative democracy, a democratic ecosystem which allows for citizens to have agency, which they feel today they have lost. They have lost the trust because of the concentration of power, they've lost trust because of inequalities, they've lost trust because of the complexities and the sense that somebody else is making decisions for them. So we need to bring power back to the people, people power. But again, an ecosystem which actually works. And this is where deliberative democracy and participative democracy can come in. Because what it is creating a way to deal with the trust issues through true dialogue. I see Angie Hobbs here, a good friend, and she will tell us that Plato's wrote about Socrates and Gorgias when they were discussing, where Gorgias was saying, yeah, rhetoric is just for, debate is just for power, is to win over the other one, it doesn't have any moral value. While Socrates was saying, no, we really need to have a dialogue where we understand each other, we respect each other, and we are looking for a common truth, or at least a common understanding of how we deal and solve our problems. This is where I think deliberative democracy can complement representative democracy, which is much more, we are not only representing people, we're also fighting for power. But deliberative democracy and participative democracy is more like allowing the citizens to actually work together with their different views to find solutions to our social problems. Now, there have been, this goes back to the ancient concept, of course, this is inspired by ancient Greece of randomly choosing through lottery citizens, direct and participatory democracy, and we have examples today. So, for example, in Ireland, they used citizens' assemblies to deal with the issue of abortion, a very controversial issue in a Catholic country. They had citizens deliberate for 6 months, come up with proposals that went to a referendum, and actually they changed their constitution, legalizing abortion. In France, after the Gilets jaunes revolt towards the taxes on diesel and gas, they had a citizens' assembly to propose for environmental measures. The Porto Alegre has come in many years ago on the idea of participatory budgeting. The Convention for the Future of Europe used the deliberative citizens' assembly to come up with ideas, which Calypso will tell us later on about creating a more permanent body of citizens' assembly for Europe, where we can deliberate and talk about these issues. So these forms of deliberation allow for greater trust. People take agency, people talk and discuss, they can learn from experts, they can feel that even polarizing issues can be depolarized and not become part of demagogy. And in the end, it gives a sense of empowerment and a sense of ownership and building trust. So I think these are the main elements. I don't want to get into details, which we can use. I, as a rapporteur for democracy in the Council of Europe, have written a report, and the report is on deliberative and participative democracy, proposing in the end that we create a fourth branch of government. So we have the executive, we have the legislative, we have the judicial branch. Let us create a deliberative branch of government, a participatory branch of government. As we had tried when I was Prime Minister, we call them wiki laws, where we'd put everything on. George Papagostadino remembers, of course, as Finance Minister, even the tax issue was put on the web to be discussed by the citizens. And I remember when he came back with the ideas from the citizens, he said some of them were very good, and we actually adopted them in the tax reform. So this, I think, is very important for today's world to strengthen our democracies, which in the end will strengthen what we are defending, that is the European democratic way of life. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask you later about this report, so I will come back to you again. Mr. Gilman, what's your opinion on that?
So thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor to be here at Delphi. I'll try to address directly the question that you asked about whether it's possible to scale this up. But before I do that, let me just say that the Μπορούν Institute, where I work, is actively involved now in trying to institutionalize this kind of citizens' engagement in the state of California, where we are headquartered. We have a project that's called Engaged California, which is actually trying to do citizens' assemblies using a digital platform that we have basically borrowed from the open source platform that was developed in Taiwan to do exactly this sort of engagement. This has proven extremely successful in Taiwan. One of the reasons why Taiwan had very little backlash during the pandemic is the decisions that were made about how to handle the issues of the pandemic were all deliberated publicly through the digital platforms of the e-government in Taiwan. That model has been proven to be successful in Taiwan, and we're now importing that to California, and we're going to continue to do that. Doing this digitally, by the way, is also good because it makes it easier for many people to participate at scale at lower cost. But before we talk about the cost of this, I think the most important thing is to talk about the culture. In the last panel, Ivan Krastev was talking about the need for a different kind of strategic culture in Europe. But I also think we need a different kind of democratic culture in Europe and in all democracies. One of the things that has gone wrong, I think, with democratic practice and theory over the last several decades is we've come to think of democracy as really being about voting. And obviously voting is very important. Picking our representatives is the crucial part of democracy. But what we really want is to have a culture of participation. Democracy in the ultimate sense is about participation, vast participation in decision-making over things that affect our day-to-day lives. And this is something that people have to be committed to. And we know that this can be people can be committed to these things. I would take an analogy from the way in which people are committed to the idea that they should serve on juries for trials. That varies from one country to another, which kinds of issues get determined by juries. But there's a long-standing understanding that the legitimacy of the criminal process or the legal process is greatly bolstered by having ordinary citizens participating in the decision-making process in trials. And the same thing, I think, needs to be institutionalized at a cultural level in the democratic practice. And I think if people understand that this is an important part of actually having a democracy, which is participating as an individual in the democratic decision-making process, not just by voting, but by engaging on a regular basis, then the question of how we're going to pay for it and how we can scale it up becomes natural. We just have to do it. It's something that we believe in as an organic part of the way we think about democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilman. Ms. Nikolaydi, your turn now.
I think listening to George and Nils, you will have heard that this is not the lovey-dovey panel where we've talked about power politics, geopolitics, and now it's the soft underbelly of democracy. No, because the future of our world and the future of this epic struggle that we're living through right now between regimes of freedom and regimes of autocracy is really what will make or break our capacity as humanity to undergo the big transformations of our time. So we're talking about the geopolitics of democracy. And in Europe, I would suggest that what we are talking about, translating what was heard already, is what I call citizen power Europe. That this great claim to power that we've been hearing in so many panels here in the DELPHI Economic Forum will be made or broken by our capacity to draw on the collective intelligence and will of our citizenry. That's what we've heard, and this is so important for what is at stake today, here and now, especially in the context of the Trumpian upheaval. It was really a hard job already before the transformation, but now we are in a different world. We know this. So coming to the question then, we have this term, it's not a magic wand, deliberative democracy. We all deliberate. That's kind of what we do as humans. So the first point that you've heard is that scale in the last 200 years has required delegation. We're just too many. We're not ancient Athens. The ecclesia was at max on the Pnyx, 10,000 people. But it was managed by the boule. The ancient Greeks knew the wisdom of chance. Chance is the great equalizer. And in the ancient world, they knew this. Today, but then what happened in between is we're too many, we build nation state, so we delegate to the Weberian state. We delegate to corporations. So the question before us is, can we roll back delegations in very complex society where we need these machineries? And the story we're telling today is that there's a triangle, right? There is elections, there is direct democracy sometimes, referenda, and Nils knows it very well in California. But these are frustrating, because you just put your vote in and boom, you go home. Maybe it's okay, you've got better things to do at home. But deliberation is the glue that brings the citizen in between. So the story we're telling is a big, grand pushback against the disenchantment that our citizens have about democracy, the temptation to go to the Trumps of this world, the Erdogans, and all the rest of it. And we see that in the protest of Europe today. So what can we do? And George talked about the ecosystem of deliberative democracy. Yes, that is what we are, discussing today. The essence of democracy is that each of you in the room, but also everyone else you know, feels that they are writing themselves in the collective story. Writing themselves. Not all the time, sometimes, intermittently. And so if you start having a world of many assemblies that are randomly selected, you feel that you have an equal access. But combining the ancient Greek wisdom with technology, that's how you can scale it. Liquid democracy. You have random selection and you have big ways of putting this, thanks to AI in particular, and that's a conversation to be had, on the web. So you have this equal access. You have ownership. And indeed, George mentioned defense. This is one of the biggest themes we've been discussing here. If people are going to die for our ways of life, they better have a say of when, how, for what, in which circumstances. If people are going to pay huge amount of taxes for the digital transformation, the Green Deal, existing in this world of capitalist upheaval and tariffs, they need to know and decide together where their taxes will go. And this is not happening with EU budgets and budgets at any levels of our polity. And a last point that is so important in this context is integrity. What has been the claim of the far right in many of our countries is, well, we have integrity. We are against these elites that have captured the system. Corporations, state, elites. So against state capture, we are, the providential man will kind of make it all good and pure. What we're saying is if citizens can see that the people just like them can make decisions, can work together, and they don't have time to be captured because they're added for 6 months, a year, then they go back and others take their place. Then you start having greatest trust in the system. And indeed, as George mentioned, what we see when there are these deliberative panels, whether in person or on the web, is depolarization. People listen to each other and they start converging. Not radically, there's still conflict, because that's what democracy is. It's all about conflict. But the conflict is more civil, less intense, and more listening. So this is the story that I think we want to paint, and probably in a second round, we can be a bit more specific as to how.
Thank you. Mr. Schinaas, what do you think?
Well, what do I think? I think that the headline of the story should be...
Before that?
It's okay, it's okay. It's okay.
Oh, no,
okay.
it's you.
No, go
I
ahead,
heard Ms. Espinosa. It wasn't me.
It's close.
Mr. Schinaas, okay. But
Oh, okay, no, sorry. No, please.
you can
please,
coordinate
please.
the...
Go, please.
Okay, I mean, the starting point of this discussion is who is the enemy? who is the enemy of democracy? And contrary to Ivan, who earlier said that Europeans consider different enemies depending on geography, I take a different view is when it comes to external threats to our democracy. Since Salamina, the enemy is always the same. Autocrats, despots that do not share our way of life, the model of society we stand for, and they go against us. So this is the enemy when it comes to the external ecosystem. Of course, there are many inside enemies that have a direct impact on the quality of our democracy. Oligarchs who think that they own politics and polity because they produce an X% of their country's GDP, or because they have football clubs or TV stations or radio stations. Another enemy is, of course, algorithms and those who pay for algorithms. I mean, if you read articles that saying who are the most effective Greek politicians, or the best tavernas in Delphi, or the 5 Greek islands that you should never miss, all this is paid by someone to a software engineer that uses an algorithm and then induces you to go, visit, buy, fall in love, think, and vote. So this is the enemy, internal and external. I don't want to spoil the party of deliberative democracy, but I take a different view. I don't think, and it's an iconoclastic view, I assume the cost of it, is that I do not really think that deliberative democracy is the answer to all this. I wish it would, but it's not. To my mind, the answer to all these threats to our democratic systems is informed citizens and the rule of law. This is what makes our democracies more resilient, more informed, and more impactful. If we go for deliberative democracy without making sure that we have an educational system that produces informed systems, free media, rule of law, separations of power, effective judges, that will not work. And again, I was member of the College of Commissioners during the Future of Europe operation, which was the big, mega opportunity for deliberative democracy in Europe. Sorry, but to me, it was Brussels talking to Brussels through different people who were representing different segments of society, but it turned to be Brussels talking to Brussels through these people, not a bottom-up operation from these people to Brussels. And the final point, if we were to take this view that deliberative democracy is the cure to all our ills, and if we take, George Papandreou knows something about referenda, but if we would go for this road of referenda, if the Germans would be asked to vote on a referendum whether to abandon the mark, there will never be a euro. And if in the 1981 the Greeks would have been asked to vote for or against EU membership, the result would have been no. So, again, I fully understand why deliberative democracy is becoming a subject. I know that is a relevant factor. I am for people speaking out, voting out, deciding, shaping through consultations, but I have great doubts whether deliberative democracy is the best avenue or vehicle to get to what really people want.
No, you don't need me to say that it's definitely your right.
It's definitely Espinosa now.
Now it's Espinosa, so thank you. Thank you, moderator.
It's clear, I think.
And you said, what are the issues? And I think we need to go to step one, to start with a headline. And the headline says, liberal democracies in crisis. And in many ways, there is a performance crisis of democracy, of the ability to resolve and quickly the problems of people on the ground. There is a legitimacy crisis, the issue of representation and ownership of decisions. And that's where perhaps where deliberative democracy comes to play, which is not exclusive. It's not an either-or scenario. You have the rule of law and you have strong institutions, then you don't need people to say what they think and to actively engage and participate, because ownership is of critical importance. The issue of algorithms and disinformation, of course, it has reshaped the idea of public participation, engagement, and democracy. And let me bring you to my part of the world, to Latin America. Look at Latino Barometro, the polling mechanism. 8 out of 10 citizens in Latin America do not trust political parties. That's a big thing. And in countries where voting is not mandatory, in Ecuador, my country, it is mandatory. You need to vote, you need a certificate. In the countries where voting is not mandatory, then you have presidents that are elected with 30% of people voting. So, you know, how representative, how legitimate is the system? But here, I would agree with my co-panelists that people actively participating in engaging in citizens' assemblies, like in Ireland, is going to solve the problems of performance of democracy. I would say no, it's not enough. Of course, we all believe in the principle of subsidiarity, that decisions have to be made at the local level, at the community level, and then go up. And when you design policy, the most successful policies are the ones that are designed bottom-up and not top-down, because there is social ownership. All of that we know, it's written in the books, but there is an issue of scale and the limits of citizens engaging directly. You can do that at the community level, the Porto Alegre model of participatory budgeting. But you know, the more you go up, the more difficult it gets. And I'll give you a very concrete example soon. But also there is the issue of time and need. And here I'm bringing you back to my region. When you say we're going to do this people's assembly to discuss on the main issues of the countries and the main challenge, now and today they will respond, we want jobs, we want security, we want access to health. When? Now. Now. That's when you have the most popular president in Latin America, President Bukele of El Salvador. And it's not a place where you see that citizens participate directly. And I think that there we really experience a profound challenge. And the profound challenge is innovation in democratic arrangements. And the idea that it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of model, that culture matters, that translation of what social ownership and social cohesion, how it's built in a country like my own with 15 different nationalities, I think is absolutely a challenge. And let me tell you just one example. When we drafted the new constitution in 2008, I was very much part of that. This constitution was the example, the vivid example of a deliberative democracy. Everybody participated, all sectors, all ages. At the end of the day, there is never enough, because some complain, no? The flower cutters complain, literally, because they were not consulted, you know, the bakers, you know, it's never enough. What is proper representation? And I think we need to rethink how we choreograph in a way that it's institutionalized. And George was saying we need a fourth pillar. We have a fourth pillar in Ecuador. It is called the National Council for Citizens' Participation. And in my country, it is the country now where 7 out of 10 citizens say that they prefer authoritarian regimes that can quickly solve their problems, including the very profound security problems that we are facing. So yet again, they're not straight answers. Of course, here we are all for a citizens' participation, but we need a proper choreography that adapts to particular circumstances, and we need to seriously think the performance crisis of the democracies are as we know them. And again, I would end with the way I started. The headline is, liberal democracies are in crisis. So a lot of space for innovation, a lot of space for creativity, and a lot of space to say there is no one-size-fits-all, especially looking at the diversity of the world around. Of course, here it's more a European perspective, but let's think about African models, Latin American models, and perhaps models that work better. I spent 5 years living with indigenous peoples in the Amazon of my country. Believe me, that's where I learned what democracy means at the very, very local level.
I see. Thank you very much. Now, I know it's tough, but you can do it. You will have a little more than 10 minutes, which means that it's essential for democracy that each one has 2 minutes for his or her answer. I'd like to start from Mr. Gilman, and apologies for not referring to your to the fact that you are Executive Vice President and CEO of Borún Institute, and of course member of board of the Democracy Foundation and Culture Foundation. I'd like to ask you about some programs which are supported by Borún Institute to renovate democracy. What's that, and what are your outcome of these programs?
Well, supporting democracy has been something that the Borún Institute has been doing really since the beginning. Our foundation in 2010. And it's interesting that we talk about the question of performance. I agree entirely. We were founded partly in a reflection of the failures of governance that were so obvious already 15 years ago, and that the final cascade of effects, I think, are really arriving only now. I think it's really important to think about democracy, again, as a process of engagement. We've done a number of things ranging from referendum reform in California. We've worked with the Athens Democracy Forum here, worked very closely with Καλυψώ in supporting her work here in Europe. And we've also done more work about citizen engagements. We've talked with people in Chile about working with indigenous communities there for engagement as well. So there's a variety of different initiatives we've had. But I think the most important thing overall is to think of, there's 2 different dimensions that several people on the panel have mentioned. Decisions that people participate in, I believe that participation produces better outcomes. So on an output basis, you get better decisions if more people who are going to be affected by those decisions are participating in them. That's the reason why we support subsidiarity, for example. But there's also a legitimation process. So it's partly about function and effectiveness, but it's also partly about legitimation. And the important part of this is not necessarily that it's going to solve every problem. I agree entirely. We must have the rule of law. We must have effective judges. We must have an informed citizenry. But this is one element of the tool that I think can help support both the legitimation and the improvement of functional outcomes.
Thank you very much. You were very accurate, and thank you for that too. Mr. Pαπandreou, we come back to the report of the Council of Europe and the value of its deliberation. What are some of the most surprising things you found? And you also have the 4th branch of government. These are the policy recommendations. I referred to them during my my introductory remarks. The policy recommendations of Democracy and Culture Foundation reports.
Well, I would agree with what Neil was saying earlier and others. from our findings, participation is effective. This idea of authoritarianism and decisionism, which is basically the basis of fascism and Nazism, that somebody has to be effective, that the authoritarians will, of course, oppress and they will hit brick walls. Participation actually is effective, first of all, because it does bring in the wisdom, the collective wisdom, and even I think Aristotle, was it, or Plato, he believed in the collective, or Socrates believed in the collective wisdom. They may have had their problems with democracy, but they did believe in the collective wisdom. And it has been proven. It has been proven that when you have collective wisdom, you can be effective. Secondly, when people feel engaged, when they are part of the process, when they own the decisions, then it's much less polarizing and it is much more accepted because they understand the dilemmas. When we are making decisions, difficult decisions at the top, people don't understand the decisions, why you chose that or that. It will polarize, it will create problems. And that's why sometimes referenda are not the best tools. So yeah, referenda can be useful, but that's one of the many possible tools. And what we're talking is about creating a much deeper and wider ecosystem of daily or continual deliberation and discussion for our citizens. And I agree with Mr. Schinoa on education, but education, first of all, our education system, yes, is not doing well. We are training people for professions that maybe they do not exist in a few years. We do not train them to become citizens. So that's important. But one of the most effective ways of educating citizens as citizens is engagement, is having them participate. And that, of course, goes back again to the ancient Athenian concept. When you participate, you learn, you deliberate, you understand, you listen to the other side, and we have to create the ecosystem for this. One of the problems we have, of course, I don't want to get too much into this, is we have these digital platforms that have taken over our public space. So our town halls, what we are here, they've taken over. So all the debate or discussion is through these digital platforms, and they have created the rules of engagement. They're called algorithms. They don't want to look for true dialogue and respect of each other. They want profit. And how do you make profit? Through hate, through fear, through sex, through whatever. It's not through really looking at that. So we need to take over and create our ecosystem. I would say in Europe, we should create an ecosystem for platforms which is truly democratic. And that could be scaling it up too, because we could have algorithms that actually help debate, that help build consensus, help people understand and educate. And I would just want to add one more thing. One of the reasons, which of course deliberative democracy is not going to solve unless we have the political will to do this, is that we have a huge concentration of power today. Our democracies are being undermined by the huge concentration of wealth and power. I don't have to give you any other example than Elon Musk in the United States, and he's not the only one, but they, and I have been in politics, money in politics, taking over politicians, taking over institutions, capturing media, capturing football teams, capturing culture, the digital platforms, judges or whatever. If we do not break that system, we will not have democracy. And one way to help break that is to create new forms of representing the people through deliberative and participative democracy, and that is what we've been reporting in this report in the Council of Europe for the fourth branch of democracy. And whatever it has worked, whenever it has been done in a systematic and careful way, and these are experiments. Many of these are experiments. We have to learn from this. But when it is done well, it has had amazing results. So again, I bring back the Irish example because it was very characteristic. A very polarizing and difficult issue in a Catholic country, the issue of abortion. They had a citizens' assembly, randomly chosen. They deliberated for 6 months. They talked to experts. They proposed that the constitution should change. Then they went to a referendum, and the referendum confirmed their proposal. Now the Parliament of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is formalizing this procedure to make it something that will be an institution. Thank you.
Thank you too. Ms. Nikolaydi, would you like to tell us some things about Democracy Odyssey?
The reason why this project that I co-lead, the Democratic Odyssey, is sponsored and supported by so many in the room, Athens Democracy Forum, the Council of Europe, Commissioner Switcha for Democracy in the EU, and indeed the Borgun Foundation, many MEPs in the room, Eliamep, and I could go on and on, is that actually it's a unique project. So we are talking about something general around the world, we're experiments on citizen engagement. This project looked at all this 3 years ago and said, what can we do and what can the EU do? And our moment was to say, well, the EU itself could have what George is talking about, a fourth branch of government, but it's not quite government. It's a body. It's the imaginary of a body that would be made of maybe 1,000 randomly selected citizens. And they wouldn't be, Margaritis, very importantly, because your point was so crucial, they wouldn't be Brussels talk to Brussels. They would be constituting an assembly that would travel around Europe in different cities or countryside, ports, navigate, because we're talking about an odyssey, navigate and involve people in those places as well as transnational citizens. So the story we want to tell is Europe comes to town. The people don't go to Europe in Brussels, Brussels come to town. And to make this imagination credible, well, and with the help of good friends like the Borgun Foundation, EU funding, etc., we have set in motion an actual proof of concept, a pilot assembly, a prototype. George has been very active in it. We met at the PNIX, we met in Florence in the Palazzo Vecchio where the Medicis took over the Republic 500 years ago. We will meet in Vienna. We have this assembly, and it's lots of imperfection because it's an experiment. It's not that expensive, not much carbon footprint because we have a lot of local citizens. And by doing this proof of concept, we are trying to promote an idea. Now, the good news, because my time is up, is that we have a wonderful website. So just type the Democratic Odyssey. You will know everything you want to know. And you can even become part of the network because our philosophy, our ethos is radical inclusiveness, radical transparency, and a huge network of friends of the Assembly who are promoting the idea and participating in this wonderful pilot that we are doing this year.
Thank you. Mr. Skinas, was the conference on the future of Europe a good example?
Okay, I have 52 seconds, so I will reuse as few as I can.
We have a delay time, but no penalties.
Yes. First, I think it is urgent to immunize our democracy, to vaccinate our democracy. That's the most pressing need of all. How we do that, I insist, the quality that we can inject into our democratic system is the must, and the best avenue to do this is through education. During my school years, the most boring lesson at high school was η αγωγή του πολίτη, citizens education. This was the moment that everybody was going either doing other things or trying to escape it. It was so bloody boring because there was nothing to be said that would prepare us as citizens. It was a description of the typology of, I don't even remember what. So unless, and I agree with George, we need to be able to produce informed citizens through our education system. We need to encourage critical thinking, different types of exams. And then when these people become citizens, we need to reinforce their independence, their ability to ask questions, to control through separation of power, great, well-organized media, and strong parliament. If we do all that, then I'm okay with deliberative democracy. But I wouldn't start with deliberative democracy referenda to do all the rest. The same way that I would never, I have a panel later, I would never start with a common European army to have a European defense identity.
Okay. So, Ms. Espinosa, you have the last word.
My goodness. I would say agree. And I would say 3 takeaways. Number 1, democracy literacy, very important. I totally agree. And we need informed, critical, and responsible citizens. That's what would make the difference at the end. I love the project that you mentioned. And the number 2 is institutionalize ways of participation. I think it's the example of Ecuador on this National Council on Citizens Participation has done good things. And not only institutionalize, but fund. You need to invest. It's costly. It costs money, and I think it's important because it's a good investment at the end of the day. But the issue of time and performance continues to be relevant, especially in countries like my own. The capacity to respond and solve problems and solve them now. I think that there is a choreography that needs to be made, with creativity made available to citizens. Citizens should think, believe, and trust that the system that they live in performs and responds to their needs as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for this interesting discussion.